This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Well, I guess that's it. We waited. Came back to see you, but you never made it.
That is the Black Pines with the song The Morning After She Left. When I listen to that song, I think about someone who has belatedly realized that maybe they made some mistakes in a relationship that it is now too late to repair. And that kind of regret is what can happen when people over time realize that the relationship that they've been in or the series of relationships that they've been in have not always been the healthiest or best for them. I think sometimes their partners feel that regret more than they do. What we see our clients here at Growing Self describe is this feeling often of newfound liberation when they decide to stop engaging in relationships that are not good for them and begin instead prioritizing their own health and happiness and well-being. And it's such a joy to be part of. And it's an important topic and one that I wanted to talk about on today's show because we see a ton of people here at Growing Self, a lot of relational work. We do couples counseling, relationship coaching, but we also help a lot of individual clients who are trying to get clear about their relationships and about themselves. And sometimes they're coming for help fixing a relationship, maybe with a partner who doesn't want to come to couples counseling, so they feel like they have to do it on their own. But sometimes it's from people who aren't quite sure if they're in a relationship that they should spend a lot of time and energy on fixing. Like somebody who's been in a relationship that for 5 years, they're not married. It's, kind of a mixed bag relationship. There are things that they're not really happy with, and the relationship is stalled. It's not moving forward, and they're coming to us for help around how hard should I try to make it work with this person? And when do I just say, you know what, I need to let this go and move on and find a better situation for myself? That is a tough situation to be in, but one that I think is worth exploring. And so that's what we're doing today on this episode of the podcast, is talking about what a healthy relationship is, what a healthy foundation looks like, what is a sign that there is growth and opportunity possible, and what is a sign that there might not be growth and opportunity possible. And so to help me with this, I have invited my dear colleague, Brittany Stewart, who's a marriage and family therapist on our team here at Growing Self, and she has a lot of experience working with people around this issue, both individuals and couples. And so thank you, Brittany, so much for being here with me today.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yeah, well, me too. And it's one, I see you like in our consultation groups and in our meetings, like this is a topic that is clearly just such a passion for you, and that I see and have always admired about you, because it's not just enough for you to help people improve their relationships. You're always sort of listening to how healthy is this relationship? Is this relationship good for both people in the relationship? And because those things really matter a lot. And sometimes even if we can teach people how to communicate and do the skills, if there's not a healthy relationship structure underneath, we need to have that on our radar. So to jump into this topic, can you just talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you first notice or listen for if you're working with, and we could take it one at a time, but a couple or an individual that might make you think, is this really a good situation, fundamentally? And we're not talking about capital A abuse. That is a different animal, but just that sort of, what's going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that I'm always looking at is, what is someone's experience of themselves and their partner in a relationship? Like, what is the overall quality? Do they feel good about themselves in the relationship? Do they
Mm,
feel like the relationship benefits them and serves them and functions well in their life? And do they give their partner the benefit of the doubt? Right?
mm,
Like, when I start to hear that partners believe that that their partner is ill-intentioned or malicious or doesn't have their best interest at heart, I can really hear that there's just been a lot of erosion in the relationship,
yeah.
and that really affects how we see ourselves too. If we're not trusting our partner to have our best intentions at heart, or to really hold us in their hearts in a positive and meaningful way, then
Hmm.
that completely impacts how we see ourselves and how we function in the world.
Yeah. Well, so how we see ourselves. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Like I heard you say
Mhm.
that when someone believes that their partner is like almost out to get them, or is
Mhm.
hostile towards them, or is doing
Mhm.
things maliciously, um,
Mhm.
how does that begin to change the way someone feels about themselves?
Mhm. I think that can change a few different things about how we might see ourselves, right? Like,
Mm,
one might be that we start to believe that we're less worthy of
mm,
experiencing love and connection and belonging. And even though, right, like, my hope is always that people know that's just inherent and that doesn't change even with the status of our relationships or the quality of them, but it does impact that belief around
yeah.
ourselves. And I think the other way it shows up is we might start to, experience like more anger, or we
Mm,
might start to be more hostile ourselves, or defensive or aggressive. And I think then it kind of forces us to take a look at how we're showing up in the world. And it
yeah.
can feel really difficult and murky to show up with those kind of behaviors and emotions and not know
Yeah.
what to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And that like um the shame or regret that comes when so somebody in an unhealthy relationship begins to themselves show signs of that, like anger or hostility, or like shows up in weird ways, and then they think, oh my god, what am I doing? I'm
Mhm.
not being a good partner, I'm not being a good mom, or whatever it is, so that they
Mhm.
internalize that. But then I've also heard you say at the same time they can be internalizing these messages from their partner that, you know I mean, I think what we both hear a lot is like, if you were better and if I loved you more, then I wouldn't treat you this way. But it's like
Mhm.
plays into that self-doubt that I'm not good enough, that the reason my partner is saying these things to me or not giving me the love that I need is because I'm not quite good enough. And if I were better,
Yeah.
they would be behaving differently. They would be
Yes.
better to me if I worked on myself. Is that
Absolutely.
the trick that people get sucked into?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see that a lot,
Mm,
especially, I mean, I would say I see it with people of all genders, right? That
mm-hmm.
they have this belief over time, whether it's through failed relationships
Yeah.
or chronic on again, off again, or just a long-term relationship that has a
Mm-hmm.
lot of wounds in it that have
Yeah.
never been healed. They really internalize this thought of like, I have done something that makes me like inherently unlovable or
Mm,
unworthy of having this healthy relationship or have this healing.
yeah.
Um, and it's really difficult to sit in
Yeah.
that. And my hope is, again, is always that people know that's not true.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I'm glad that we're talking about this though, because I think that what we're just putting our finger on right here is the almost like subconscious core belief of people who come in for help with their relationships, is like, can this be fixed? Should I work on that? And sometimes I think the place where we need to go to is what they're telling themselves about the relationship. And if, like, for example, if they believe that their partner could be much different with a different person who is better than them, and if they just worked on themselves and became the person that their partner wants, then they could be loved. To talk about how, what if that isn't actually what is happening? And what
Mhm.
if this is how the person you're partnered with would show up whether or not they were with a different person or a better version of you. And that can be a big step sometimes, because I think that people really believe that they're the problem. And and so first of all, let's just say for everybody within the sound of our voice, this is a process. There is not anything that Brittany or I am going to say. There is no piece of advice or wisdom that is going to help you jump over that there mountain. But Brittany, when you're working with a client who is stuck in that place where they've gotten tricked into believing bad things about themselves, where do you even begin? Or like, if somebody's listening to this right now who probably needs to do some of that work, where would they start?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a complicated question, because
Yeah.
I would approach it differently, right? If I'm just working with one person or if I'm working with the couple.
Yeah.
But I think the first step for any change is always just being really aware of what stories we're even telling ourselves, right? And I love Brene Brown's work, right? In her Netflix series, or in her Netflix special, when she says, the story I'm telling myself is, right? And so I always encourage clients to identify, like, what is that story that we're telling ourselves?
Yeah.
And just to name it, right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm sitting with an individual, can they just get really clear on, like, what is that story they're telling themselves? Or if I'm working with a couple, can they just share with each other in a really disarming way, like, this is the story in my head, right? It may not be true, but it feels very real.
Yeah.
And can they just get it out there and name it so that we can work with it? And then, of course, it's really identifying, like, can we challenge that? Like, is there really, like, evidence that this story you're telling yourself is true? Is it based in any sort of fact or reality? Or is it just, some emotion that's coming up and we're trying to make sense of it? And this story is the best way that we're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Just kind of cracking into that narrative and bringing it out into the open, and then just sort of looking at it together. Yeah.
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 And then I think, if I'm working with a couple, what can be really powerful about this, right, is we often don't share the story that's in our head in a disarming way. Usually we're sharing it in a blaming way with our partner.
Yeah.
And we can tell so much about the health of a relationship and the ability of our partner to really be in it with us when we share that story just based on their response, right? So if we share this awful story or this painful story we're telling ourselves, and our partner is able to move toward us and comfort us and say, oh my gosh, that's the story in your head, let me help you with that, right? Like, that's not how I see it, that's not what I'm feeling. That can be really powerful, right, to help offer that reassurance. Or if there is, like, that lack of comfort and responsiveness, and maybe that story gets reinforced, then I would say that's a sign, right? Or something else to look at deeper, that maybe that story is based in some truth about the relationship.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of looking at this. And so on that note too, so you, like all of the marriage counselors on the team here at Growing Self, practice evidence-based forms of couples counseling. And one of the things that the approaches that you've really focused on is one called emotionally focused couples therapy that takes a closer look at the attachment needs of two people in a relationship. And what we know from research into emotionally focused therapy is that when people are in distressed relationships, it impacts, and because relationships are a system, I mean, people impact each other, right? But what we see is that both people are impacted in such a way that they both stop, like, how do I say this? Being the best version of themselves. I mean, being in a distressed relationship creates reactions in each person that can be hurtful and can sort of support that negative cycle. And I think it's important to talk about that because, like, we expect that in a distressed relationship. And just because that's happening doesn't necessarily mean that it is a fundamentally unhealthy relationship. It's just that we need to do that work of healing. So let's just even start there. I mean, when you're working with a couple who has, not been in a great place for a year or 3, I mean, for a lot of couples, it takes a while to show up in our office, but what would you expect to see that would be normal?
Oh, yeah. So usually, right, EFT or emotionally focused couples therapy talks about we get into this dance with our partner, and every one of us has a dance in our relationship. It's totally normal. And it's part of being in an attachment relationship. So what I might see that is really normal, I would say the most common thing I see is what we call like the pursuer distancer or the pursue withdraw. And this looks like when partners are in distress, one partner might like protest, as Sue Johnson calls it, right? And they might start to demand or criticize or try to get any sort of engagement from their partner, right? They're just seeking some sort of reassurance or comfort, but it comes out in a way that might be kind of critical or
angry.
Distressing to their partner. And when that happens, their partner then gets overwhelmed and kind of withdraws or shuts down. And it kind of reinforces the cycle over and over again. The more one person shuts down, the bigger one person gets, and the more the other partner shuts down, and so on and so forth. I would say that's the most common thing I see. And it's really, really normal.
Yeah.
Or common, I guess I would say. It's really, really common.
Yeah.
And there's a lot we can do with that, because really what we know underneath, right? Like when there's like basic safety there, right? This isn't an abusive relationship. Again, this is a healthy relationship overall. It's that we normalize that distress and we try to identify like what's really happening underneath that, right? Like there's usually some like core attachment need for comfort or safety or connection or, anything like that, just really vulnerable attachment need that isn't being met, and we're just scared to ask for it in that way.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you said all that. And I think it's important to put that out there, because I think that's part of what can get confusing for people who are like, is this a bad relationship? Is this an unhealthy relationship? Because if you're in a distressed relationship with someone who is engaging with you in a way that makes you sort of feel like withdrawing and avoiding conversations, like the perception from that position is that you're living with somebody who's critical and judgmental and never quite happy with you and always complaining about something and who wants you to be something that you're not. I mean, that is the inner experience, right? And on the other side of it, the person who's experiencing their partner as being withdrawn or avoidant is like, they never talk to me, they shut me out, they like ignore me, it doesn't matter, they just like they don't care, emotionally checked out, they don't care, right? And so when somebody comes into our office and is like, this is what's happening at home, they don't care, they're checked out, they like make me feel like watching ESPN is more important than our marriage, like that's how it feels. And we also need to talk about the fact that this is normal in a distressed relationship, and that because this is happening doesn't mean that you're in a bad relationship necessarily, but it does require a path of healing where you can start in a safe place, talking about the things that are important, kind of get reconnected. And I also just want to say again, that is not a like, do these 2 easy things and it'll be all better. This is a process that requires
absolutely,
probably months of how do we unwind this. So there's setting everybody's expectations. Okay, so there's that is normal and expected, distressed relationship. How would you say that is different from somebody who is in a relationship that may feel in some ways similarly, but is actually not a healthy relationship? Do you think that there are sort of like markers that we can look at or think about that would indicate what is this? Or does it really require like that assessment process? Like, do you have to start doing the work to try to fix it and then see what happens? Like, how do you begin to sort that out?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that, we assess very early on, so it can kind of become apparent very quickly if there is just like this common distress happening, and we can work with that, or if it's actually that there's something unhealthy or problematic or unsafe happening in the relationship. I think general markers, right? Like the thing I'm always looking for is there like basic responsiveness? Can somebody take accountability and responsibility for their actions in the relationship? Can they identify their part in the distress? And if not, right, like I think it's common to experience where we get caught in blaming each other, but usually we're able to eventually step back and say, oh, I can see that I do have a part in this. If we're just really inherent or really set on blaming our partner and absolving ourselves of any part of the distress, I think that's problematic. And then looking for things like, is there a desire to control or to have power over our partner? Is there, are there elements of like shaming and, just like really deep criticism present in the relationship? Is there like manipulation happening? Is there, is one partner trying to isolate their partner? Are they threatening their partner ever? Is there verbal abuse happening? Those are some markers that I think are indicative of there being a bigger problem in a relationship beyond just common distress.
Yeah. No, I get that. And so, and just to say out loud, what you're also talking about are like markers that we would associate with domestic violence or intimate partner violence, like the power and control, the isolation, the manipulation. And just to say very, very clearly, it is never appropriate for an ethical couples counselor to attempt any kind of couples counseling in the presence of actual domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It is just a no-go situation. We would not do that because it's not safe ever. And so, that's not what we're talking about here. In those situations, like Brittany, if somebody was listening to this and being like, oh no, it's actually violent, just for the record, what should they do?
Oh, absolutely. I would always recommend they both go seek individual therapy, right? Like, is there something that can be done to help both partners, or, at least safety plan or do something that really helps establish safety for both partners.
There's a wonderful,
especially the victim.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's a wonderful national resource. It's called the hotline.org. Day and night, you can call or chat with one of their representatives who can help you either on the spot if it's an emergency, or also provide you access to all kinds of resources through community mental health agencies, like safe houses, that kind of thing. And so if you're really in trouble, so the hotline.org, Brittany's recommendation is to get involved in individual therapy, ideally with someone who has that background to help you get safe. So that is not what we're talking about. But Brittany, so what we're talking about is sort of the, if there's a spectrum of like basic safety in a relationship, and it's starting to get to this like, I don't know, sort of area. As a couples counselor, if you've determined that it's okay to continue working with a couple that's not that bad that you were going to pull the plug, what are some of the things that you would want to be talking about with that couple? The things that you're seeing, the patterns. And again, it's not a process. It's not informational necessarily. It's a process. But where would you hope to take that process, and what would you expect to come from it?
Yeah, I always start by helping couples what we call like mapping their dance, right? So they're each identifying like what moves are they both making in the dance? Are they doing different dances with each other? Or how are they showing up? And we'll actually like map it out and say like, this is what I'm doing. And part of the things that they're becoming more aware of, or some of the things that they're becoming more aware of, are like what's happening in their body, right? Because we know that emotions show up in our bodies first. So usually, even if it's subconscious, or even if we're not really aware of it, there's probably some somatic sensation happening in our body that we're triggered by, that's telling us that distress is happening, or there's a loss of connection happening. And it kind of sets this dance in motion. So I'm asking each partner to identify like what's happening in your body. Can you just check in and notice what's happening? What emotions are coming up for you? Can they name, right? Like, are they experiencing anger? Are they having, experiencing sadness? Is there judgment happening? Like, what are they thinking right now? What emotions are coming up? And then I ask them to name the story they're telling themselves.
Yeah.
And this includes the story about themselves, about their partners, about their relationship, right? So these might be the, like, I'm not worthy. They don't love me. Our relationship is broken. Whatever story they're telling themselves, can they name it? And then identify, like, what do they do with that, right? Because usually those three things, like the emotions and the sensations in our body and the stories we're telling ourselves, become too much. And so then we react. And how we all handle that distress is going to be different. That's when we might protest and become critical, or it might become too much and we might completely shut down and say, I'm going to go ahead and move into self-preservation and shut down. So it's really important that couples just become really intimate with what is their dance. Can they map it? Can they tell each other about it? Can they do this together, most importantly, versus it's me versus you. This is our dance and we're going to talk about it and figure it out together. And so the first step is really just naming it and getting really familiar with this.
Yeah. And so that's it sounds like the place where you would always start. And I think what I'm hearing is that with a couple where there was growth possible, they would be able to engage in that and be self-reflective and talk about, this is how I feel. And when you do this, I do that, and kind of that awareness. How would you contrast that with a couple maybe that you started working with, where you started to think, I don't know how much growth is possible here? How would it be different?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to give it a little bit of time, right? Because this attachment work can be really, like, deep. And sometimes it's harder for people depending on experiences they've already had in their life, right? So if they never have experienced a secure attachment, it might take them a little bit of time. We might have to map it over and over and over again and give them, kind of like homework to, like, go home and just see what you notice if they can't really identify. So that's one thing that might come up, is it might just take
saying that. Yeah, because it's and that's really important, because just if it's not easy to do at first doesn't mean that it's a horrible relationship that needs to end. It means that there is a therapeutic component involved. That's why we're here, is to help people grow and go through that transformational process, really. And so at the beginning, it's normal that it's not easy to do that. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It takes vulnerability. Like, this process is really vulnerable, and we have to ease into that. But if beyond that, right, if we're not ever able to kind of establish that safety to feel vulnerable and to do this work, then there might come a point, right, where I might suggest that someone does some individual work around some, like, emotional intelligence, or if they maybe have some attachment stuff to heal from their childhoods or past relationships, or whatever it might be that's coming up for them. And my hope is always that couples can do this work together, because I really do believe that we heal best in trusted relationships with others. And sometimes we need, some individual work just to support us in identifying what's happening for us before we share it with our partner or a therapist in a couple setting.
Yeah, to work on yourself. And if the wounds run so deep that you're really not able to show up in a healthy way in your relationship, that's a sign that you need to work on yourself a little bit. And I would imagine that for someone who will be very unlikely to be able to have a healthy relationship, they would reject that idea and they would not want to do individual work. So that would be a sign, I would think, that it's probably not going to work out, at least in a healthy way for you. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I think that at that point, it's up to everyone to decide, is this something that I'm willing to kind of, like, wait out and hope that my partner changes their mind, or do I really have to kind of accept that they're not in a place to do this growth work right now?
Yeah, completely.
And maybe that's not going to serve either of us or this relationship.
Yeah. Well, this is really clarifying, because, I think a lot of people that are stuck in this conundrum are in a place where they're trying to figure out, is this relationship healthy? Can this relationship be saved? How much do I want to invest in this relationship before having had the opportunity to do the kind of work that you're talking about, Brittany. So they're attempting to make these major life decisions without having the information that they, because like after 4 months of working with Brittany and there's no movement, and Brittany is recommending that your partner go to individual therapy and they're refusing, that is good information upon which you could make a life decision. But before you've done that, it's like you don't even know what's possible or not. And that is what feels so paralyzing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, something that I see with even people in the dating coaching world,
Yeah.
right, who are seeking relationships and also individuals and people in relationships, is they're just hoping that they can read the mind of whoever they're dating or their partner and just know what's going to be possible or if it's going to be a functional, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And really, I think that responsiveness is just so important. We have to be able to express what we're needing, what we're wanting, what our core needs are, and see how someone responds to that, which really does require like that vulnerability and baseline safety to do that. But how does somebody respond to us, right? When we say that we really want this type of relationship, we want a secure attachment, we want to be able to express emotions. How does somebody respond to that? And if it's, they're pushing back on it, or that's not what they believe in a relationship, then maybe that partner's not suited for us. Right. Or are they interested in doing that and they want to do that work? And are we willing to allow space for that growth to happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a wonderful, way. And certainly for people who are maybe single and in that dating coaching realm, because we often work with a lot of individual clients who are interested in creating healthy relationships. And so I think what I have certainly experienced are oftentimes people who have become aware that their last several relationships haven't really been great for them. And so they come to us for help with, okay, what do I need to do differently this time to connect from the get-go with somebody who will be a better fit for me? And how am I showing up in relationships? And so that's an important area of growth work. And what I'm hearing you say is that one of the keys to that is, as you're developing a new relationship with someone, just to be really observant. How is this person responding to me over and over and over again? And from that, begin to figure out, okay, can they respond to me? But it's so hard though, because at the same time, if your core narrative is, but if I were more lovable, they would be nicer to me, or whatever it was. And if they're saying, well, if you would just not XYZ, then I wouldn't be so snappy with you. It can be so hard as an individual to like figure this out and sort it out. Ugh. It's complicated. It's complicated. Yeah.
It really is. Which is why I think responsiveness also includes like, this is hard for me. I don't know what to do with this, but I want to be in this with you. Yeah. I want us to figure it out together. It's okay not to have the answers. It's okay to mess up and make mistakes and not get it right. Yeah. We're all not going to get it right sometimes in our relationships, but where is that motivation to work on things and to grow and to stay in it together?
Yeah. So you're saying that in a healthy relationship, you should be hearing some version of that from a partner who has the capacity to be responsive to you and could grow with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now one last aspect of this I want to run past you. I think another trap that people can fall into, particularly women, although I see this happen with men too, and they've been in a relationship, and maybe for the last couple of years, it's a long distance relationship, or maybe they've been dating, but they're not living together. And one person is like, I want to live with you. I don't want to be long distance anymore. I want to get married. And in their mind, there is this sometimes subconscious core belief that goes, because if we weren't long distance, this experience would be different. Or when we get married, this experience will be different than it is right now. And that is what they're sort of holding. So they're really pushing for this like future thing, but that what they may be missing is like warning signs of an unhealthy relationship that they have interpreted as, well, when we get married, this won't happen anymore. Have you noticed that? And could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I noticed that in both like unhealthy relationships and also just relationships that might be healthy
Yeah.
but are having some distress.
Okay.
And I think it's just part of our culture that it's really hard for us to be present and focus on what's happening now, right? And so of course, we create this ideal in our head that the future will be better, and there's like that hope, which is positive, and the future might be better.
Yeah.
And the only thing that changes, with time is what we do with it. And so it's really important that we focus on, what does the relationship feel like now? What's serving us? What isn't serving us? What needs work? And are we willing to put in that work so that we can have that ideal future we're thinking of?
Yeah.
Where we're thinking it won't be present in the future, or this dynamic will be different in the future. What are we both going to do now,
right,
to help that be a reality? Or is there something actually happening now that is really unhealthy, and I just need to be really aware of it and name it?
Yeah.
And maybe walk away from something that isn't serving me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. To differentiate, will it actually be better once we're married or whatever? Or is this the way this is this actually the relationship? And Brittany, what you're saying again is there needs to be effort in on both sides to, okay, how do you imagine it would be once we were married or whatever? And how close to that can we get before this, because that's kind of the sign that it would actually be different once you were married or once you were living in the same town or whatever, in terms of the emotional responsiveness and the empathy. Is that it?
Absolutely. And do you both have the same expectations?
Yeah.
Right? And this is part of like naming that story again, is what I'm naming, is that true for you as well?
Yeah.
Right? Or do we have the same expectations, the same hope for our future? Are we both hoping that this dynamic is different in the future? Or is this maybe uncomfortable or painful or difficult for me, and to you it feels fine?
Yeah.
And if so, that's a conversation that we need to talk about and see, is there a compromise that needs to happen? Is there something that actually does need to be addressed and healed?
Yeah.
Or is this, something that's going to cause a really big rupture and mean that the relationship is not going to work long term?
Yeah. Well, what a great point. Because if this feels intolerable to me and it's perfectly fine for you, how close, how can we close that gap at all? And if the answer is no, or there's not willingness on one side to have it be different, that's important information that is worth listening to. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. What a great conversation about such an important topic. I know we need to wrap things up here in a second, but do you have anything else to add on that question around healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships, and how to tell the difference?
Yeah, I think really what it comes down to, and I tell every couple this that I work with, my hope is that you can walk away with what we call attunement and know how to practice attunement. And attunement is really just like a process of being present with our partners. It's where we engage in that emotional responsiveness, where we can turn to our partner. We feel like we can be vulnerable. And even if something is difficult or painful or uncomfortable, we really trust that our partner is going to be in it with us.
Yeah.
And so I encourage partners, like, if you're feeling like disconnected or you're feeling like you're not in attunement, that's okay. But how can you find your way back to each other? And do you both take part in that process? I think it's just so critical to have that responsiveness and reciprocity in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I love that, especially with the idea that you were talking about earlier, that in a distressed relationship, you won't have that attunement because of that pursue withdraw cycle, yet it is something that can be intentionally created if both people are engaged in that process. And so that's the goal, though, is that attunement, and that's really the fundamental heart of every relationship, is that emotional connection, emotional intimacy, feeling of emotional safety. That's the goal, and that's what is present in healthy relationships and what feels, fundamentally not possible, even with work in relationships that aren't healthy. Is that a good way to summarize it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brittany, thank you again so much for your time and meeting with me today. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Thanks so much for having me, Lisa.
You can learn more about Brittany and her work as a marriage counselor, couples therapist, and online relationship coach at growingself.com. And while you're there, you can also take our free How Healthy Is Your Relationship online quiz. You can take it yourself, you can share it with your partner, and then you can compare results. It's an easy, kind of low-key way to get a snapshot of your relationship with its opportunities for growth as well as its strengths. So you can check all that out and more at growingself.com. And I will be back in touch next week with another episode of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.